This is Track Talk, and we're going to be going through a game of 1846 that I played yesterday. This is not a live recording as the other Track Talk Plays videos have been, but I think it will still be valuable. It just, the game was too slow to really have a live recording of, so I think this will be a little bit better for the viewer. We'll jump right into the auction. Rico Broken is going to lead things off, and of course, we can't really see which companies he's going to pick, but we can for me. And in this case, I took the Chicago and Western here. I was noticing that I would be going late in priority and wanted to have the flexibility of being able to teleport to Chicago to, no matter what company I chose. I did have an option of picking up the Michigan Southern, which I think is a good private, but again, without being able to determine which company I was going to be starting, I was a little bit nervous about locking myself into that. Count von Blucher then goes, KHR, Rico Broken going again. And then for my second company, I actually decided to pass. I don't really like the O and I, the Big Four, or Little Miami. And I was worried about spending a lot of money in the private auction because I'm a newer 1846 player. I didn't want to put myself in a hole. So I decided to pass. And I think we can, well, we can't see the other players' choices. And here I was left with another option of the Ohio, Indiana, and Little Miami with a pass, so I was happy to just take another pass. I think by taking passes early, you do run the risk of getting not so good privates and being forced to buy them late in the auction or late in the draft. But in this case, the other players were actually willing to take mail and some of the other expensive privates without passing, so it left me the opportunity to pass twice. And that was the end of the draft. And it ended up being that KHR and Count von Blucher spent the most on private auction on the private draft and would be leading in priority, whereas myself and Rico Broken spent a little bit less than they did and are moving later. KHR ended up with a Boomtown, Big Four, Ohio, Indiana, so he has some pretty good southern map privates. Count von Blucher has Michigan Southern and Little Miami, so both north and south. I have the teleport, and then Rico Broken has ended up with mail. He took that for face, by the way. He didn't let anybody get it for cheaper. And then also meat packing. So not great synergy for his privates necessarily. KHR leads us off in the auction, and with so little cash, I was anticipating him floating the IC, but I believe he actually goes for the B&O, and I assume he's doing that because he has the reserve token on Cincinnati and has 3 privates that synergize pretty nicely with that. So he forgoes the opportunity of parring the IC, which would have given him an extra treasury worth of share. But he does end up with a pretty nice company for his privates. Count von Blucher, on the other hand, does take the IC and he pars it at 100, which gives him the extra money. So he is able to overcome his expensive privates in that manner. Now I'm up and I'm looking at this and saying, well, of these companies, the New York Central is probably my preferred start. I can potentially run hot into Cleveland, at least early in the game, and then teleport into Chicago later without, any fear of losing my east-west run later on. The PRR is a less attractive company. It has one more token and it has a reserve token in Fort Wayne, but I don't know that I really need that with the Chicago and Western, so I wasn't looking towards that. The C&O, I'm a little bit worried about competing against the B&O, although in retrospect, maybe I should have looked at the C&O more seriously because there's a good chance that I would have been able to piggyback on the B&O's track lays. And then finally, the GT, without the Michigan Southern, I'm not a huge fan of the GT. It starts kind of out of the way. It doesn't have very many tokens to defend its runs, so not a company that's oftentimes able to go very late. With that analysis, I decided to pick the New York Central, and then I had to decide where to par. The problem in 1846, as I'm sure many of you are aware, is that the operating rounds are run in reverse order for the first operating round. So if I par high, I may very well lose out on the 2 trains, and my whole goal here, at least at this stage, was to run into Cleveland with 3 2 trains. So if I par for 100 or higher, there's a chance that I will not be getting any two trains. But if I par lower, I'm kind of undervaluing this company and I may not be able to afford trains later in the game. So I ultimately decided to par at 100, right behind Count von Blucher in an effort to go, no worse than third in the first stock round or first operating round. And there was a chance that, another player could par a little bit higher, although it's pretty unlikely. Rico doesn't have that much cash, so the idea of him parring for more than 100 is low. And I think that this may have been a mistake. I may have tried to par, a little bit lower than 100 and hoped that Rico would par for instance, 80. Um, and get myself a faster operating order. The other risk here is that if Rico pars under me, the PRR is going to operate before the NYC and could potentially mess with my Cleveland strategy. But regardless, I did pick a $100 par, and I think that probably was not the best decision. I could have parred a little bit lower than this and been okay, but that's what I did. Rico does round us out, and he does in fact take the PRR. He pars it super low, and will buy a lot of his own shares, which puts him in a very rough position. KHR now going to be buying his own B&O, and I will buy actually shares of other companies. So I could buy an NYC share and give myself a little bit more cash. It also allows me to issue more shares for even more cash in operating rounds. But I noticed that I had enough cash to buy two shares instead of just one if I bought the B&O and the PRR. So that's what I decided to do. This would give me an early stock advantage and preserve my treasury for the NYC later in the game. Rico, as noted, is buying his own PRR, and I'm the only one with cash. Actually, sorry, Rico still has cash. So I won't even be going last in priority by spreading my money like this. And this leaves KHR with priority into the next stock round. Michigan Southern operates. This player is not owning the GT. The GT hasn't even floated yet, but the Michigan Southern is still interested in laying good track because the IC player can potentially take over that token. So he's going to lay Port Huron, and then he starts heading over to Chicago. Big Four, this company is looking to cooperate with the B&O and will lay towards Cincinnati, at least in the long term. PRR, as noted, gets to operate before me, and I was very worried about him getting to Cleveland and just really messing up my strategy. But it ends up being that this player is pretty new to 1846 and maybe 18XX in general. And I have to say that this was a major turning point in the game for me because when I saw these track lays from this player, he actually doesn't even go to Cleveland. When I saw this, I immediately recognized that this player was new and probably not going to be a threat for the rest of the game. So I made a mental note to myself about this and really basically said that I'm not going to buy any shares in this player's companies under any circumstances, and I'm going to sell out of the PRR as soon as possible because I think that he is not going to be able to run companies well, and I'd rather distribute my money into other companies. So this, I think, is a very important point to think about when you're playing online, is that if you identify a weaker player, be very careful about investing in their companies and don't feel a need to unnecessarily target them. They may find themselves in stronger positions, but they oftentimes won't be able to take advantage of those positions. So just kind of let them play their own game, hope that they invest in other people's companies, and then if they sell, they hurt the other player's net worth, they're going to randomly withhold and do bad things with their companies. You just don't want nothing to do with it. So I recognize this very early in this game, and I think it has a lot of consequence in how the game actually turns out. PRR, he buys just a single train. Another mistake, the two trains in 1846 are quite good, and he's really going to run the risk of missing out on any other two trains by doing this. On the other hand, this is great news for me because I will be having a much more likelihood of picking up three or maybe two trains, which I had really hoped to do. B&O's operation. So I was anticipating him just jumping right over to Cincinnati, and he does do that to cooperate with the Big Four's track. So again, in retrospect, if I had started the C&O, I may have been able to link right up with Cincinnati and just take advantage of all the track that he has laid for himself. And of course, since I have the C in Chicago and Western, I wouldn't have to worry about a race to Chicago and beating him there. I could just, take advantage of his track and then teleport into Chicago at my leisure. So that may have been the better play than starting the NYC, but not how I decided to go. B&O, I'm anticipating that he would only buy two trains here because he has the third train in the Big Four, and I believe that is what he does. Now the Ick, this player could have laid into Centralia, hoped to get into Terre Haute, and run into Chicago from the south, but he ultimately will make a different decision and ends up cooperating with the Michigan Southern. But we don't know that just yet. So he's going to issue some shares, has a ton of cash, and now we see that he is going to forego a Southern strategy for now and just leads into Chicago. He buys just two trains. Again, he has a private company and will be getting the train from that company very soon. So this is now my turn, and I'm left in a position where I can buy two trains. I would have preferred three, but this is kind of good enough, I would say. And interestingly, I noticed that as a result of the ick, the situation has really changed. I can just teleport immediately into Chicago and take advantage of that track, get into Detroit, and secure myself a east-west run in my very first operation, basically. So I ultimately decide, even though Cleveland was left available to me by the PRR, that I'm going to just ignore that and move over to Chicago. So I issue my shares. I figured that I was going to need the cash, and these shares were not going to become more valuable for me in the next operating round. They would actually be a little bit worse. So I might as well get that cash now. And now I have money for my trains and my tokens. So I buy in my private, teleport over to Chicago, and then link up with Detroit. And I immediately token there. In prior videos, I have criticized tokens in Detroit because this city does open up with three holes and it makes those tokens a little bit less valuable. But I think in this case, I'm really just worried about having two runs for my trains. If we don't break into green, Chicago is not going to upgrade and get into Chicago connections. So I will be, not really running very well with just a 10 value Chicago. So I did decide to token in Detroit, and I think that that was fine to do. I don't really regret that decision. I buy my two trains, and this leaves me without enough cash for a green train, but I'm hoping that one of the other players operating before me, basically the Ick, will be able to buy into green for me so I can do my upgraded track. This is the operation of the minor companies now. Big Four doesn't have much longer in this game, I don't believe, and he's going to be heading in the general direction of Chicago. The Ick now can't really lay too much track. Could start in the south here, but doesn't have much synergy until the green trains open up. So I believe we do see him head into Centralia. Just preparing for the late game, and then he redeems a share and he runs his two trains. This does leave him a little bit short, or actually with the payout, he does have enough money for the green trains, which I believe he does pick up here, which is a real boon to me. If he hadn't done that, I think I would have been in a much worse position going into the next stock round and probably for the rest of the game. He buys in his privates. Now, as a result of this, I'm able to upgrade Chicago. Don't have the money or the inclination to upgrade Detroit. It's a very expensive tile. It would help my run, but since I have the ability to upgrade Chicago, that's what I do. And I will run my two trains for a lot better than I otherwise would with the Chicago upgrade. It's not enough for a double jump, but with only two trains, it's kind of unlikely that you would be doing that anyways. So that's a consequence of my high par. One thing I'll note is that The operating order in the next operating round is going to be very important because if I'm somehow able to operate before the ick, I can block him out from Chicago by upgrading this track here. It's highly unlikely that I'll be operating before the ick though, because I have two market shares and nobody really has that much cash to clear the market. I can't protect my own market, and the ick has no market shares. So at best case scenario, I'm expecting we'll both fall back. In a more realistic scenario, probably just the NYC will be falling back. Either way, I'll be operating after the IC. And that concludes my operations. B&O now, he's going to be linking up with Louisville. He issues some shares and gets into Chicago. I thought he also got into Louisville there, but I think that's later in the game. He's running pretty well, and as a result of his low par, does have enough to double jump. Um, this is nice for me since I bought a share of his company, so I take advantage of his pretty good revenue and the nice increase in his stock value there. I also want to point out here that his company was parred quite low and already has only 3 shares in the treasury, so he needs to be a little bit careful, or else he'll find that he's needing to withhold quite a bit for trains in the late game. He buys in his privates and has very little cash in the company. PRR, this player struggled a lot throughout the game, and one of the reasons we weren't able to do a live recording is because the length of time it took to make decisions. But he does ultimately get into Cleveland here and is going to run his single train. He does pick up a green train for himself and will be running a little bit better in the future. But as you recall from our earlier discussion, I had already decided that I was going to sell out of the PRR. Even if the runs looked like they might be okay, I just really didn't trust the decision making coming out of here. He buys in his privates, and we're into the next stock round. So I am tied for the lead in terms of share density, but I am quite far behind in liquidity or cash on hand into the stock round. So I'm anticipating being probably third or second in stock density leaving this stock round, which is a little bit dangerous. And I'm hoping that I can improve the runs of the NYC. One thing I'll say is that the NYC is kind of the least attractive company in this stock round. It only has two trains. Its run is not going to be that good, and it's the second most expensive shares, which is, I wouldn't say it was intentional on my part, but it is very nice when this happens because you really want to preserve your treasury as long as possible in this game to afford expensive trains. So, by luck or by design, I end up in a pretty unappealing position for the other players to be investing in my company. KHR leads us off, and he's going to buy his own B&O. He actually buys it from the treasury, so he gets a little bit extra cash in the company, enough for some track lays. But again, he's really depleting this company's long-term potential in terms of affording permanent trains. Count von Blucher, he's going to invest in his own IC. I join him in the IC, and Rico is just continuing to double down on the PRR. KHR is buying a market share of the B&O here, and Count von Blucher continues to buy the IC. IC does look pretty attractive here. He has good track and has good trains. He's going to be able to get into Chicago, as we mentioned, as long as nobody puts a market share there for him and then clears my market. I could put a share in the market for him. He wouldn't be able to defend, but I do value the revenue of the company and the stock jumps that it's going to be having over having it fall back, especially because it's not going to be able to change the operating order. So I don't ultimately decide to do that. But I think here I do decide to sell out of the PRR because I'm noticing that I can afford a second share of the B&O if I do so. And I do that. So I think for the rest of the game, I just avoid any interaction with Rico Broken, basically. Rico still has money for shares, and unfortunately for me, that will mean probably that I'll be operating late in the operating order or priority. KHR could buy another share as well. I don't remember if he does or not. Rico is now buying a B&O, which is a much better investment, I think, than the PRR. And Rico does actually max out on the B&O. So he's not quite able to float up, but that company is totally sold out of the treasury. And this means that I'll be going second in priority, which is much better than I had remembered. IK is operating first, so he will be able to get into Chicago. He immediately recognizes the necessity of him doing so and the danger from the NYC, and he's able to secure that track. This makes it very hard for a fourth company to get into Chicago. They're going to have to wait to Brown at least, and there's no guarantee that they get the track they need. So bad news for the PRR player. He also lays a second track into St. Louis from Centralia, and is going to be running all four of his trains, or all three of his trains, and probably running for the most in the operating round. 220, that's enough for a double jump, which again is really good for count, but since I've spread my cash around and have one share, it does benefit me as well. He actually buys a fourth train, so I'm really happy that I have invested in this company at this point. And I'm looking at these green trains and getting a little nervous. I really want to make sure that I'm able to pick up at least one of these. I don't want to be stuck with just two trains until Brown. Um, so I'm, doing some math and trying to figure out if I'm going to be able to afford one of these with just a payout. And it ends up that I am able to. Again, I have the money to upgrade Detroit, but I am not a rich company and not going to be able to afford a green train if I do that. So I'm just going to sit on the Detroit track as is and hope that the IK does me a solid and upgrades Detroit, just like when he brought in the green trains for me. I pay out, and this leaves me enough money for um, a green train. I'm looking just for the cheapest train that I can afford. I don't need a 4 train, although a 4 train would potentially give me the east-west run from Windsor to Chicago connections if Detroit was upgraded, but I can't guarantee that. So I think I end up going with the 3.5 here. A little more flexibility, just a little bit cheaper. So I now have 3 trains. Will be running a little bit better in my next operation as a result. The B&O player already has 3 trains and has pretty good track. I think here is where he gets into Louisville. He redeems his share, does go into Louisville, and will be running his 3 trains really well with an upgrade of Cincinnati. So he's going to pay out for 270. Again, I own 2 shares in the company, so I'm happy to see it, but it is benefiting him much more than it benefits me. He double jumps. He actually half pays and is still able to double jump. And that is fine with me. So, as we said, he's having to withhold already because his treasury is basically sold out. He buys the last green train, so we are now stuck waiting for someone to break into the Browns. PRR, he upgrades Cleveland and then he starts heading west, I believe, to Fort Wayne. So just kind of not really great track for him in general. His runs are not going to be amazing. So I'm glad that I sold out. And he's just gradually falling further behind because his company is, um, undervalued and, or not undervalued, it's appropriately valued, but low value and not paying well. He does have mail, which helps him a little bit. Um, so he's going to run for 160 and he pays that out. Next operation, I believe we see the IK upgrade Detroit here. He does. So I'm just thanking my lucky stars, and they really are lucky. This is no skill of my own. I'm just piggybacking on the IK, both literally and figuratively. So he upgrades, and it's going to help my run now that I have 3 trains. And he even lays Toledo for me. So I will be getting an early east-west run straight off in the game with my 3-5 train. He leaves a token in Detroit. Or Chicago. He's probably a little bit worried that if he didn't token there, the PRR player could upgrade Fort Wayne or token in Fort Wayne and then upgrade this tile to get in there. I think that was probably not a necessary move. I don't think that the PRR player really is paying attention. And in fact, he could have done that exact thing on his last operation, which really would have hurt the IK. But of course, the PRR player is not really paying attention. So the IK player does want to tempt fate and does token his Chicago. He runs his 4 trains and he's going to be paying out a monstrous 450 in OR2. Really good for him. I'm looking at this and saying we got to kill these 2 trains. But unfortunately for me, I also am running 2 trains, so that's going to hurt me almost as much as it hurts him. He's going to double jump, and I am taking advantage of that as previously noticed. The NYC is now operating, and there's no real incentive for me to lay too much track here. I have pretty good runs, and my 3-5 is guaranteed going to be running from Windsor to Chicago connections, so I don't really need to link up into Cleveland or do anything spectacular here. I think I just sit on my cash. Looks like I do lay one track, um, and it's really not anything that is very helpful for me because I already have runs for all my trains. I don't need that track. But I do get my east-west run, and I'm paying for 330, so not nearly as good as the IC, but pretty darn good, and enough for a double jump, which I'm very happy about. And a lot of this money is going into my treasury. B&O also running 4 trains, operating later in order, so needs to be a little bit careful that the brown train doesn't come out before he operates in the next round, and he will lose one run on the twos if that were to occur. I am the only player in a position really to bring out the um, brown train because I'm halfway there and I operate before him, but that is a concern, I'm sure, for the B&O player. He's linking up again with Louisville, probably looking to run multiple trains out of Cincinnati to Louisville, and he's going to be running very well as a result. He is in the unfortunate position of having very little cash in the company, so he needs to, I think, again, half pay. He full pays there, um, but is going to have to do some withholding in the future. Looks like now he's laying his private company track and looking to help connect Cincinnati and Cleveland. PRR has a lot of options now that all this good track has been laid. I would have liked to have seen him get into Cincinnati and improve his runs, but I think he ends up going to Fort Wayne. Yeah. So he could have just teleported to Fort Wayne. He didn't actually need to lay that track, but again, I'm not sure that he fully understands. He's going to pay it out. He actually full withholds, which is interesting. Um, and just another example of why I didn't want to invest in his companies. Stock round 3, I am third in share density, and I am second in liquidity, or at least in cash on hand. So not a terrible position. I'm also operating or moving pretty early in this stock round. So what I notice here is that there's only one B&O share. If I buy that, I will still have cash for an IC share, which I'm guaranteed to get since there's 5 in the market or 5 available. And by buying the B&O share, I will force the other players to either buy my shares or the much worse PRR shares. So Count von Blucher, I think, misses that and does not buy the B&O share. He actually buys his own IC. And again, there's really no competition for those shares. And I will snap up the B&O and then look to getting an IC share down the road. Rico Broken, I think so he just buys a IC share, and then KHR is also going to buy an IC. Count von Blucher is not able to afford another IC, and unfortunately, I've already bought the B&O share out from under him, so he's going to be forced to buy a PRR since he doesn't even have the cash to buy an NYC. I snap up the last IC, and Rico's passing. KHR, I think he buys the last IC, so IC is floating up, and my company has maintained a full treasury yet again, which is very lucky. I believe Count von Blucher buys another PRR here. Looks like he's just going to pass. So he's probably beginning to recognize that the PRR is not being run well and doesn't want to sacrifice priority for a company that just is probably not going to pay any returns. KHR already going last and does buy PRR. So Count von Blucher and I, the rest of the players, just pass and priority remains unchanged. We're into the next stock round or next operating round, and the B&O has actually managed to leapfrog me as a result of his double pays and the fact that he's floating up. That is pretty bad news for me. I don't recognize it at the time, but losing out on turn order here really ends up affecting the game in a major way. The IC is train locked, does have money for brown trains, but is going to have to wait for other companies to bring them out. So he is using his privates, And then we have now linked the north and the south through Dayton and Cleveland. He has 4 trains and snags the token in Cincinnati, which ends up being pretty much a big deal. Um, this does open up into 3 holes, but you have to be the lucky company that gets that last token down, and we'll see who that ends up being. He is now linked up with St. Louis through Cincinnati and has a really good run, 570. I am a minority holder of this, so I'm not, you know, miserable at this, but it's very nice for him. B&O also running 4 trains, also train lot, not going to be able to bring out the brown trains. Um, and he is upgrading Dayton and just running his trains. He's running for 500, also a very good run. NYC now. So the big question here is whether or not I push through to the brown trains. My run is not going to be sufficient to get me there with a half pay, so I would have to full withhold to do it. And at this point, I'm saying to myself, well, I have 2 of the 2 trains myself. I don't know how eager I am to rust them. And also, I have no co-investors in my company, so by just full paying, I will get to a brown train in the next operating round, and it will hurt the PRR because his 2 trains will rust before everybody else's. But I have no way, because of the way operating order has evolved, I have no way of rusting the other players' trains before they operate. So there's not a huge incentive, I would say, here for me to buy a brown train. And I really was worried about really hurting myself with a full withhold to do it. So I ultimately decide just to pass, run my trains one more time, and full pay. I am only $6 short of bringing out the Browns with a full pay, which is, tantalizingly close, but just not quite enough. I don't think it would have changed much if I had brought them out there. PRR, he is going to link up to Chicago, but as previously noted, missed his opportunity for a token there, so just kind of not very important track. He is assigning the meat packing. He's going to be able to take advantage of that finally. But his track and his trains are limited, so not going to be running very well. He is half paying again. So with a full withhold in the next round, would have the cash, I believe, for a permanent, but I'm operating before him and I will continue to pull further ahead as a result of him half paying. Um, the other thing that I'll note is that the other 2 players have invested in the PRR, whereas I have continued to abstain from doing so. And I think that they will kind of rue their decision to invest in this company throughout the game. Ick running 4 trains again, as I didn't bring out the brown, and he's just going to start laying track to make it harder for late game companies to get good runs, basically. He's running for 580, so still just monstrous runs, and the B&O is going to be running very well as well. So he's running for 500 again, and he full pays there. So he is out of the restricted zone of the market. Both the IC and the B&O now are, and the NYC will be joining them very shortly. My goal here is to preserve some opportunities for myself to get into St. Louis. So I'm going to begin upgrading a token to get down south. I think that I maybe could have done things a little bit better here to try and secure my run earlier, but it's hard to look that far ahead, I guess. I full pay here, and I will be buying a brown train. This hurts the PRR more than it hurts everybody else, and I'm happy to have afforded a cheap permanent train with a very healthy treasury, which means that I will almost certainly be running 2 permanent trains later in this game. The PRR, he is going to just lay some kind of random track here and is probably not recognizing the fact that he's not going to have an east-west run if he doesn't head south. He really could have helped by upgrading, this track here and then hoping to get past Terre Haute or into Terre Haute, but he is just kind of wasting track points. Like that track there really accomplishes nothing in my opinion. He issues shares and he's going to be looking to buy a permanent train of his own, but he's going to have to, looks like half pay to get there. and he picks up a second permanent train. So we're not going to be seeing a bankruptcy. Of course, we weren't really expecting one. This is 1846 after all. But he is able to secure himself a permanent train regardless. Into the next stock round. So the big danger here is the relative operating order of these companies. I really do not want to fall back down into the limited share area of the market. I'm hoping to stay above the red and start triple jumping. Um, but as of right now, I am in danger of falling back into the red unless I get some help from the other players. I could buy my own shares, and I think I work on doing that, but it's no guarantee that I'll be able to achieve my goal. Count von Blucher has a ton of cash. The other companies, the CNO in particular, are attractive here, but I don't remember if he floats now. Um, he does have priority and has the opportunity to do that. He does immediately. So what I'm worried about here is that if the NYC operates after the CNO, we may see a situation where the second rank of permanent trains breaks before the operation of the NYC, and that would basically cause my twos to rust immediately without being obsolete, and it also would put my 3-5 obsolete before it has run, which would really be quite devastating for the NYC long term. So I'm very nervous that if the NYC falls back a single time, it will be operating after the CNO. And I try to do what I can to prevent that, and we'll see how that plays out. I will be working to clear my market for the reasons as noted. I don't see much appeal of the GT. The CNO was kind of the only company that's worthwhile looking at as a float. And the reason that is because it has a very easy way in Brown of just getting directly into Cincinnati and dropping a token there. So this is what I was talking about. The tokens in Cincinnati actually end up being quite consequential. I would have loved for the NYC to have secured a token in Cincinnati. But unless I operate against before the CNO, there's no guarantee of that happening. Rico broken. He's passing for some reason, has a ton of cash, and just does nothing with it. KHR, he is going to buy my other NYC market share, so I'm happy now. This has cleared my market, and as of right now, I'm operating before the CNO. Count von Blucher continuing to capitalize the CNO. I will buy my own NYC. Again, this has a very healthy treasury, already has a permanent train, is looking great for the end game right now. Rico broken. He now floats the GT, so he just was sleeping for a stock round, I guess. GT, he floats it pretty high, but needs to be careful that he's going to be able to afford one of these expensive permanent trains. Not in danger of bankruptcy, but probably is not going to have great track for this GT company. KHR is continuing to invest in the NYC. Count von Blucher continues to invest in the CNO, and I'm buying my own NYC. The GT is continuing to float, and KHR continues to invest in my company. So it looks like we're going to be seeing a situation where I and the KHR will buy one more share in the NYC and it'll be floating up. And in order for that to happen, I have to sell a share. I'm not interested in selling the IC. The IC is going to be really accumulating stock value very nicely, has nearly enough money for permanent trains. And with the help of shuffling trains around with the CNO, will easily afford at least one permanent train. Whereas the B&O, I am happier to sell out of. It does not have a permanent train and does not have cash for one. So I'm a little bit worried. Sorry, it does have permanent train money, but I'm a little bit less excited by this company's long-term prospects in terms of track development than I am for the IC. So in order to buy my own NYC share, which I think is going to be a great company, I have to make the decision to sell a B&O here. This means that the B&O could be falling back. KHR is locked and will not be able to defend, and I buy my sixth NYC share. So in retrospect, based on knowledge of how this plays out, I wonder if I should have done things a little bit differently here and not bought my sixth share of the NYC. When you have 6 shares of the NYC, you can't buy one out of the market to protect it from falling back. So it may have made more sense for me to invest in one of the newly floated companies rather than selling a share, or just sit on my cash and not buy anything so that I can really try and do my best to make sure that the NYC doesn't fall back. Rico is going to sell a share, or sorry, Rico is going to buy GT, and then KHR is going to buy the last NYC share. So right now, I'm super happy with the way things are, right? I'm going to pass and hope that the NYC floats up and does not fall back, and the B&O just falls back. The B&O falling back is not my priority here. My sole priority is that I operate before the CNO. Unfortunately, uh, GT is also selling the B&O for whatever reason, and now I think KHR sells the NYC. So now I'm kind of screwed. Um, and I think that this is the point in the game where I said, I have just lost. This game is over for me. Because I'm fully aware of the danger of my two trains not getting any runs at all and my 3-5 rusting before the other companies relative to them. So I am just miserable now with this situation. Rico is my only hope, but he is basically never going to sell to rescue me, and I probably doesn't even recognize the significance of what just happened. So again, I think that if I had played this differently, held onto my cash, or not bought a 6 share in the NYC, I could have prevented this unfortunate occurrence, but it is what it is. KHR, he's buying a CNO share. So, he traded my good NYC share for a less good CNO share. But by doing that, he's actually made it so that the CNO shares are a lot better than the NYC shares because he's made the CNO operate first. So I think this was a very good play from KHR. And I think that this was intentional. I don't think this is just something he randomly did. But it really ends up hurting me. I will be passing, and Rico Brown or Rico Broken is just continuing to invest in his own companies. And I pass, being only second to last in priority. So I'm looking at this operating order and just quaking in my boots because I realize what danger I'm in. There's no guarantee that it happens, but of course, it, spoiler alert, does happen. The IC, 2 trains will be rusting. We'll be able to pick up a cheap permanent train, and he's going to upgrade Cincinnati, which is going to allow him to immediately token there with his other company, the CNO. He's running for 700 and he half pays it. This gives him enough money for 2 of the cheap permanent trains if he wanted them, but I think he only buys 1. The B&O player also has money for a permanent train, and these trains are going to be rusting, so he is in no danger. He upgrades Detroit and needs to be a little bit careful that he doesn't drop a token and prevent himself from buying a permanent train. So he's going to have to half pay here in order to afford the permanent train. He even redeems a share, and then he half pays and has enough money for a permanent train. So all of the cheap permanent trains have sold out, and now the new company, the CNO, has just enough money for a permanent train and is also going to be able to drop a token in Cincinnati. So this is the worst case scenario. This is Armageddon situation for the NYC because he's going to be losing runs on 3 of his trains. The 2 2s are just going to evaporate, and I'm not going to get that extra run with them. And then the 3-5 is going to be on the chopping block before it runs, which is just awful for the NYC. And more importantly, I lose out on this token on Cincinnati. So as mentioned, that sale of that share was very impactful in this game. He is going to link up and then token. And I think he issues some shares. He does. So he has a ton of cash and will buy the first gray train. NYC now, only running 2 trains instead of 4, and has been taken out of Cincinnati. So I do see that I have the potential for 2 east-west runs, but I have to find a way to get to St. Louis. And because of the way the track is developed, it's very challenging to get there. At this early stage, I'm already looking towards that. I was looking at it last operating round, but was kind of blocked already by the random track lay of the PRR. If he hadn't laid this track, I could have just laid a yellow track into Terre Haute and then upgraded, but he really messed me up there. So now I'm just scrambling for any way to get into St. Louis. I think that I will decide to upgrade this token here, or this track here, and hope to eventually get into Fort Wayne and bypass Indianapolis and Terre Haute, but I'm not sure that I played this correctly. I think that there were probably more direct routes. The problem is that I'm assuming that both the IC, BNO, and CNO all are recognizing my desire to get south, and all of them operate before me. They have really, with three companies cooperating, it's not going to be hard for them to prevent me from getting south. So I was really pessimistic about my odds here. But maybe if I had played this better, um, I could have got there faster than I did. I link up into Erie. This is again looking towards my eventual east-west run, and then I will buy my permanent train. I buy the expensive 7-8 here. No reason not to. And it's just objectively better than the 6 train, and I have the money for it, so why not? First operation of the GT, he's tokened out to Detroit, so again, his routes are very limited. He's going to have to rely on some lucky track in order to have any impact at all. He's also operating in, sorry, not operating. He's also on the hook for a permanent train, is going to have to issue very heavily here to afford that. And he picks up the 6 train, leaves himself money for tokens and track, and now the PRR is playing. PRR, just like the NYC, has the obsolete 3-5 before his run, so was also hurt by that CNO move. And he should be looking, I think, to cooperate in heading south, or at least hope to compete with me for getting south. But as I recall, I think he just lays more random track. That really doesn't help his long-term goals very much. So at this point in the game, the PRR and the GT both have tokens, the CNO has tokens, and the NYC has tokens. So I'm looking at this map and I'm saying, if I want to have any chance of getting south, I need to secure a token in Fort Wayne. Because if I'm tokened out of Fort Wayne, I think that I will never be able to head down there. Um, so that is my priority in this operating round. I have two permanent trains, but I don't have a great east-west run for one of them, so I'm not going to be running very well as a result. The IC has money for one permanent train, but it's going to be not running at this turn, so I think its run is not as good this time as it was in the last. He's going to run for 520, so he does drop a fair amount, but this is just going to be temporary after he gets his second permanent train. He's going to be running quite well. And he buys the expensive 7-8 with a half pay. B&O here, also going to be running just one train moving forward. This is kind of what I was talking about. This player had exhausted his treasury very early, so he's been half paying and full withholding a lot during this game and still doesn't have money for his second permanent train. I think that if he doesn't obtain a second permanent train, he's going to be in a little bit of trouble and just slowly fall behind. If we look at the game state right now, he is barely in first place. He is 3 shares ahead of me, and I somehow am in second place. I think that if my NYC had run all the trains it had instead of having them rust, I would be probably much closer to first place in a better position. But I do think that despite him being ahead and having a share lead, he is in danger here of falling behind if he's unable to secure better trains for himself. So he is laying some track to improve the B&O's run. Um, but he needs to be a little bit careful because I don't think with his existing trains he has an east-west run, and he needs to be careful that he doesn't get tokened out in key areas, probably specifically Dayton, that would potentially prevent him from developing an east-west run of his own. And he half pays. Again, he's looking for that second permanent train. I'm happy to see this. I have invested in this company, but I'm much less invested than he is, and he is my direct competitor for first place, so him half paying is great for me. NYC, so again, I think I was hyper focused on Fort Wayne at this point, and making sure that I didn't get tokened out there. Um, and then I needed to be careful because I didn't have money for token and track here. So I think I just prioritized tokening Fort Wayne. I must be misremembering. So this is an upgrade to hopefully get into Terre Haute. And unfortunately, as noted before, because this track was upgraded by the PRR just on a whim, I'm not able to upgrade into Terre Haute. So I kind of show my cards here and declare that the NYC is going to be attacking Terre Haute in order to get into the south. But this is very easily blocked by the other players. And it also prevents me from tokening. I'm running two trains now, but as noted, my run's a little bit underwhelming, only 100 higher than it was before because I don't have great track. Count von Blucher here, he does have money for one track and a token, and he actually links me up with Terre Haute. So I am excited by that, but I think it ends up not playing out very well for me. He is running both of his trains, and he has dropped a token in Fort Wayne. So this makes this even more acutely important that I'm able to get a token in Fort Wayne, or else I worry about my long-term track. He's going to pay for 570, so I think he's paying for even better than the NYC was, and he's doing that with only one permanent train. He half pays, is looking for a second permanent train of his own. PRR, I am shaking in my boots here that he is going to token somewhere in Fort Wayne with one of his tokens. Because I think that would really hurt me. However, the fact that he has both the GT and the PRR, I think leads to him ultimately not deciding to do that because he's going to be hurting his own companies with that token, which I think I understand the inclination to play that way, but maybe a little short-sighted. You probably have to just commit to only one of these companies being viable and surviving. Otherwise, you run the risk of both of their tracks or runs being cut. So he upgrades, gets into Chicago, and is able to leave a token there. But this is all reliant on the Fort Wayne and the track remaining open, which he doesn't secure with a token. The NYC does have a east-west run and is running fairly well with a single permanent train as a result. GT now, so still I am quaking in my boots about this potential token in Fort Wayne, but I believe he neglects it again. So now I'm very happy because Terre Haute has opened up and I have the ability to run into St. Louis through there. But again, as a result of operating order, may not be able to take advantage of that. GT doesn't leave any tokens anywhere, which is kind of crazy because this company is in desperate need of securing a route and he just pays out. So at this point, the market is pretty unhealthy. It only has $3,000 in it. And I am thinking to myself, well, I think probably the market is going to break here, or the bank is going to break. And I'm just playing as if this is the last operating round. However, there are multiple companies kind of jockeying for a second permanent train, and the runs are not that high. So there is a possibility that we extend into a second set of operating rounds. Regardless, I'm just looking to hit my cert limit here, and I'm still sticking to my guns of refusing to invest at all in Rico Broken's companies. So I'm really looking towards the B&O and the C&O, and I see that there are three shares towards my cert limit and only 6 shares available. So I'm not really liking my odds, but we'll see how this plays out. KHR, he actually sells out of the PRR and he buys an NYC. So that's great for me because I couldn't have bought that share anyways. It's going to float my company up and it means that there's one less player that's going to be buying shares that are available for me. And Count is going to buy a B&O. And I think I pick up a little bit surprised I didn't pick up the last B&O there. I think I was thinking that the C&O probably had better track potential. It was going to be running for a little bit higher, even though the stock appreciation might be a little bit higher for the B&O. The other thing is that one of the players cannot buy the B&O, so there's a little less pressure in terms of buying that share up quickly. PRR player buys his own shares, which again is great for me. We have 2 players buying shares that I have no interest in. And KHR cannot buy the B&O, so we'll buy C&O here. He actually passes. I had forgotten that. I think that's a interesting decision. He is cert locked, but that makes it so that I can reach my cert limit. The C&O shares are looking appealing now. I think Rico is buying, so he buys a C&O, and then Count von Blucher's out of cash, so I am able to snap up the last C&O, I think. Oh, sorry, I buy a B&O because he shuffles. So regardless, I'm able to meet my goal of hitting my cert limit without investing in any Rico's shares. Rico is basically out of shares to buy and also is at a cert limit, so only Count von Blucher is left in a rough spot here. Everybody's passing, and we're into the next operating round. Again, with a bank of 440, I am thinking to myself at this point in the game that we'll probably see the bank break. I'm looking at the IC, it's running for $500. I'm looking at the NYC, it's running for $500. That's $1,000 in each operating round just between those two companies. And I'm thinking to myself that the other four companies are going to be able to run for at least $1,000. So I am playing with the belief that this will be the last set of operating rounds. Of course, that is not guaranteed. Operation of the IC now, and we will see him upgrade Erie and also laying track in Columbus. Not entirely sure what the significance of that track is. He may just be looking to burn tiles. Um, I don't imagine that he wants the B&O to have a better route. He is not a significant investor in that company. But as the NYC, I'm kind of happy to see him throwing away track because, again, my goal here is to get into St. Louis. So if he's not blocking me, it's improving my odds. And he will, looks like, pay that out. So running for 690. At this point in time, I'm still expecting the bank to break. Um, and we'll see how that plays out. I now am under the gun to token in Fort Wayne and have plenty of cash to lay track. So I'm going to head towards the St. Louis and leave a token in Fort Wayne, I think. The reason I laid this track instead of immediately heading towards St. Louis is because I know that the PRR and the Grand Trunk have tokens, and I don't want them to both token in Terre Haute. So by laying this track, I'm hoping to prevent the PRR from getting a token easily in Terre Haute. The GT also is blocked, at least temporarily, from getting down there. What I neglected to realize when I laid this track was that I was opening up a very easy bypass of Fort Wayne by upgrading this track here. So actually, in retrospect, I would have probably been better served to not token Fort Wayne and just rely on this bypass. This also has the downside of reducing the ability of the PRR and the GT to cooperate with me and lay track into Terre Haute into St. Louis because I've kind of blocked them out. So I think I misplayed that a little bit, but this was a live game and I was kind of operating pretty quickly. There may have been a more optimal play to achieve my goal of getting into St. Louis. So, for instance, if I had tokened in Terre Haute and then just upgraded track towards St. Louis, I probably could have not been so worried about the token in Fort Wayne. Regardless, I'm going to run my two trains, and it looks like I'm paying for 600. Um, this is, I think, the only time in the game that I'm able to run this east-west route, unfortunately. B&O does do that bypass of Fort Wayne that I discussed, and he is out of tokens, so not able to block me, although he is my closest competitor. The token in Fort Wayne does hurt him. He's not able to run the same route, but he should still have a east-west run into Chicago, I believe. Maybe with a 4-6, he's not quite able to reach. He withholds, and this is where I start getting nervous that maybe the bank won't break because he's going to put $800 back into it by buying a permanent train here. And I also was a little skeptical of the decision to buy a permanent train. I think that withhold actually puts me just shy of the lead. The withhold on the B&O hurts him a lot more than it hurts me because he has more shares, obviously. Um, but the long-term benefit of this six train, if the bank doesn't break, likely makes it worthwhile. So it's going to be very tight in terms of the bank breaking or not, and he is gambling that it will not. C&O now, I think he works to block me out of St. Louis here. So he's going to upgrade Chicago, which helps everybody that's running to it. And then he's continuing to lay track for the B&O. I'm not entirely sure why he's doing that. Um, and then he drops the token in Centralia. So I'm now blocked out of St. Louis, and I'm going to need to find a way around Centralia, which is going to be hard to do. He's paying out for 360 PRR as a result of my tokens in Fort Wayne and the track lay here. Has his run cut and is in a little bit of trouble. Um, but because of this bypass, is going to be probably okay. He would just have to upgrade this track here, which is what he does. And he should now have his east-west run again. And unfortunately, it's only paying for 360, and he's the sole investor in that company. So Rico Broken is going to come in last place in this game, to the surprise of, I think, nobody. Um, but he still has the opportunity to influence game state because he has tokens available and also can use his track points to aid one or more players. So unfortunately, even though he's in last place, still has a significant role in the game. GT, lots of money for track and tokens, and he is um, not laying any track that is all that helpful for me. I suppose it increases his run a little bit, but probably not even that. I'm not sure why he was motivated to lay this track. He's going to redeem some shares and not be able to token anywhere as a result. And he just runs for 260 and pays out. So that's the first operating round down, and there's $3,000 left in the bank. Unfortunately, now because the B&O has bought that permanent train, it looks like the bank will not break, which is a good gamble for KHR, and probably means that the other players are in trouble because he's now going to be able to run his two permanent trains 3 times, and he's already in the lead. IC running two permanent trains now starts to notice that I'm heavily incentivized to head towards St. Louis. And unfortunately for me, Count von Blucher has zero investment in the NYC. So he is motivated to prevent me from getting in there. And he has two companies that both have access to this region. So he's going to be two companies working against my one company in terms of me trying to get into St. Louis, which is just a very hard situation to come back from. He is going to upgrade Chicago again, and he's going to start laying tragic track, preventing easy paths from Terre Haute into St. Louis. He runs for 750. KHR and I are neck and neck for the lead, and we are tied in ownership of this company. So this doesn't benefit either one of us, but it is beneficial to CNO or to Count von Blucher. NYC, I think here I start trying to bypass Centralia. And, you know, in a perfect world, I would just be able to lay a gentle curve into St. Louis. But as mentioned, there are several players that are working against me and preventing this. Um, so it doesn't end up happening. But that was my goal here. And again, maybe if I'd played this differently and hadn't tokened to Fort Wayne and hadn't laid this track and started heading to St. Louis earlier, things would have ended up differently. But things played out the way they did. I have lost my east-west run, and I'm going to be running actually just a little bit worse, or just a little bit better despite that, as a result of the double upgrade of Chicago since my last run. CNO now is going to block me from getting into St. Louis, and he's running for 400 and pays it out. B&O, I think that in retrospect, this player could have looked towards helping the NYC. He is a pretty heavy investor in that company. I think he owns 40%. Um, but the game is so close, any incremental benefit for my presidency versus his could swing the game. So he is not interested in helping me. And he also doesn't have the money. So really kind of just going to be running his trains as best he can and waiting for other people to lay track. He runs for 640. So somehow is able to run for more than the NYC despite having worse trains. And I think that maybe I was running too fast in this live game and didn't run optimal routes. because it's hard to imagine that I shouldn't have been able to run better than him, having better trains. Sure, he can run through Cincinnati and I can't, but I can run to Cincinnati. So it's a little bit surprising to me that my runs were not as good as they could have been. Um, I'm not entirely sure how I could have run better than I did, but the fact that he's running for more suggests that there is a way. PRR, again, this player could help me get into St. Louis and instead is just laying random track. He is full withholding, so probably has recognized that the game or the bank is not going to break and is looking for a permanent train of his own. But he's so far behind, he's not in any contention to win this game. GT, um, he is not in a position to break the bank and could have helped me towards St. Louis, but he's not an investor in the NYC, so really not motivated to do that. He will issue shares and he drops a token in Terre Haute. That doesn't hurt me. It also doesn't help me. So what I would have liked to see is him laying a city tile on Springfield and then upgrading a gentle curve on this track here, which would have allowed me to lay a straight upgrade here and into St. Louis. But I don't think he really is that caliber of player to see that potential. And he pays out. So the bank survives with just $400. So the difference in the bank breaking or not comes down to the B&O buying that extra train, but I don't think it really changes the outcome of the game in the end, as KHR is ahead at the end of the game if the bank were to break here. So the game is very close, but it looks like KHR will sneak through with the win. Everybody has reached their cert limit except for Count von Blucher, so I think we just see him buy two of Rico Broken's shares here, and everybody else is just happy to pass. And we go into the last set of operating rounds in this game. Um, Count von Blucher is still looking to block me from St. Louis, and my only option of getting into St. Louis is to lay a sharp turn city on Springfield and then upgrade this tile with a gentle curve and then hope to upgrade this tile in the next operating round. I am looking at this map and saying, the game is extremely close, and the odds of me everything breaking the way I want it to go is very low. So I think that I actually end up abandoning my hunt for St. Louis and just start upgrading cities along my run in an effort to just incrementally improve my run slightly in a hope of eking out a win from KHR. I see he upgrades away from the track that I can upgrade, preventing me from getting into St. Louis, and is going to run his two trains. I think as a result of the track lay or the token lay from the GT, his run has to change a little bit, but he's still running for a massive 750. NYC now. So I think here I abandoned my aspirations for St. Louis. And again, I'm just going to kind of start upgrading cities to try and improve my routes a little bit. So I'm just looking now um, at how I could run differently if there was a way for me to run differently. Um, because this game ends up being incredibly close. So if I had been able to increase my run even a little bit, I may have been able to take it. So technically, instead of running into Chicago, if I'd run into Indianapolis and Cincinnati, I think my run would have been a few dollars, like $10 better. Um, what I'll notice is that I'm not hitting the maximum number of cities with either of my companies. So I guess I could have run Erie, Cleveland, Dayton, Fort Wayne, down into Terre Haute, Indianapolis, and Cincinnati. That's that is 8 stops. So if I had done that, my run would have been just a little bit better. Um, it actually would have been, I think, $40 better, roughly, maybe. Um, but I don't think that's enough to give me the game because even any incremental increase in my company, I'm only getting 20% of that Um, but it does look like there were probably better runs on the map that I missed. So that's a little bit careless of me. I do leave this upgrade on Springfield, leaving the option open for the GT player to help me. So, for instance, if he upgrades this city into a gentle curve, I can easily lay a green track here. But we'll also note that the IC player has kind of foresaw that and has laid that tile here. So I think even in that case, I'm still blocked from St. Louis. So I made the right decision, just upgrading cities, I think, here. I'll be running for 620 and actually 650. So I do manage to improve my run a little bit. And the B&O is running for 640. And as a result of the tokens coming out, is actually dropping from his last run. C&O, he's going to upgrade Fort Wayne. This helps me on my quest to improving the NYC's run a little bit. GT, not much left for him to do in the game. He does lay the upgrade, but it's way too little to help. I think that token, that tile has already been laid. I don't think there's more than one, is there? There's not. It's already occupied, so that is not going to be enough to get him into St. Louis. If he wanted to get into St. Louis, he needs to, um, work on this northern approach, but probably no track lift to do that. And he pays out. PRR. He is passing. He does have money for track. And I think he might buy another permanent train here with a withhold. He does. Of course, that's a worthless move because I think the bake, I think it's already broken, so he's going to get one run of that train. I see. He is upgrading Cleveland again. So a lot of cities have been upgraded since my last run, and I'm still a little bit optimistic that it'll be enough to let me take the game. The game is very close. I am only about $100 behind, but of course, for me to make a difference in the order, I have to run for 20% of 100 with the NYC in order to take the lead. So it's very unlikely, unfortunately, with our stock portfolios being so similar. Speaking of the KHR player and myself, he just has a little bit of a lead on me, and I'm not going to be able to catch up. NYC, I think I just upgraded another city here. I upgraded Indianapolis for an extra $10. And I've managed to improve my run from, I think it was like 600 in the last set to 680. So I've definitely jumped up a lot, but it's just not enough to come back. B&O running for 610, and everybody's paying out here. C&O, I am one share ahead here, so it benefits me relative to the KHR for this run to be really good, but it's only running for 430, won't be enough. And then the GT and the PRR, I think, are owned by two players that are out of contention for first place, so their actions really don't matter. And the game ends with me being just under $100 or just over $100 off of first place. So very close result. And I think that had I played just a little bit better, I could have taken the victory here. But KHR had that really devastating stock sale of the NYC, and I think that gave him the game ultimately. So my inclination that I had lost the game there proved to be correct. Just losing the runs on the two trains and obsoleting my 3-5 one round earlier before the other players was enough to give him the victory. So very well played to him. This game ended up being quite chaotic because of the actions of Rico Brogan, just really not playing optimally. So I don't know that this game came down to skill of any specific player. It may have just been kind of a random result from, who benefited from that player's actions the most. But regardless, this was a live play of 1846, and I hope that there are some learning points for the viewer in this game. And I will just point out this is my now third loss on the stream. Hopefully, I will be able to bring a win home soon for the channel. I hope you enjoyed the video, and we will be back in the future. Thanks for watching.